Hi there, and welcome to the Composer's Toolkit. In this video, I will be talking about the left hand of the instrument, the left keyboard of the instrument, the buttons. On the concert instruments, the big ones, we have 120 buttons on the left side, which are divided into 6 rows of 20 buttons each. There are some accordions that have 180. There are some accordions that have two systems incorporated into one. There are some accordions that have both of them at the same time. And there are different systems. It creates a lot of confusion for composers and for people who are not inside the accordion world. But don't stress over it. What changes for the accordionist are basically the fingers they choose to play a certain thing. Some things may be a little bit easier, some things may be a little bit harder on one system rather than the other, but that's besides the point. The point is all of the systems sound the same on the accordion, or more or less the same. So let's start off with the first, the more standard system. In fact, it's called standard bass or Stradella-bass, and it's the system in which we have the first 2 rows of the instrument, the inner rows, which are basses. And these basses are arranged going upwards as the circle of the fifths. So we start with F, we have C, G, D, A, E, B, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and so on. And if you go below, it's perfect fourths. Now, below this, we have another line of basses, which are called the counterbasses. And they are at a distance of a major third from the ground bass. So we have here C, we go below, and we have E, G, B, D, F sharp, A, C sharp, and so on. Then we have the 4 rows with chords. We have the major chords, we have the minor chords, we have the 7th chords in the 3rd row of the chords, and we have a diminished chord. So this is the so-called Stradella-bass system, and we have these 4 chords for each bass. So a total of 48 harmonies. If we go from C, we have C, C major, C minor, C dominant 7th, and C dominant diminished chord. Then we have G, for example, D, A. So it's also possible to combine chords. So let's, for example, combine F major with D minor. Or if we combine A minor with E minor. This kind of jazzy chords come out, which are used. These are some of the ways of writing the standard bass and the Stradella-bass system. You have sort of the Russian way of writing them, in which you write out the entire chord. In the brackets you put which bass it belongs to, and you put a letter above. Then you have the Western system, which basically writes the bass as the bass note, and then we have the chords as the note to which the chord belongs, and a letter or a number for the dominant 7th chord. So these are 2 main ways of writing for the Stradella-bass system. One of the techniques with the Stradella-bass system, which is unique to the accordion, is the so-called chord tremolo because I can do something, play something very fast in the right hand, and at the same time I can do chord changes. This is something that Berio, for example, used in his sequenza, or, for example, Salvatore Sciarrino in his Vagabonde Blu. And this is a technique which is rather unique to the instrument and can be used in all sorts of musical compositions. Now let's move onwards to the Freebass system. As I mentioned previously, the Stradella-bass, the standard bass system, offered 48 harmonies, and you must admit it's rather limiting. That's why between the 1940s and 1950s, a new system came into play. It was developed and introduced to concert accordionists, and this Freebass system transforms each of the chord notes into single notes. By pressing this converter button, this is the long one, the big one, I am transforming almost all of the chord buttons into single notes. This way I can create my own chords. This allowed concert accordionists to transcribe music from the piano, from the orchestra, from other instruments, and actually perform Baroque music or orchestral music, like for example, if I were to play the Goldberg variations, I would use the Freebass system. This would be unthinkable on the standard bass instrument. It's simply not the same, and it doesn't have the same pitches, because the standard bass system, as you might have heard, is basically only the lower octave, from E to E flat. This way we also have the ability to play very fast passages in the left hand. We also have the ability to play, for example, a melody in the left hand, and the right hand would accompany it, or we can play fugues and so on. So this was a system which marked a very important milestone in the development of the accordion. And these are some of the ways in which you can write for the accordion using the Freebass system. And you can actually make also very large chords because it allows for a larger a larger range. And if you were to combine the bass lines, which remain the same in the first two rows, then you might have actually very extended chords. You might have something very high and something super low. There are all sorts of diagrams, which you can also find on my Patreon page for the left hand, so that you can a little bit see how it works. And what's important to know, it's not something that will concern you when you are writing something, because you are thinking in terms of pitches and in terms of sound material, but it's good to remember visually that there are three main systems for the accordion, and the one that I have is the so-called Begriff System, which basically means that I have the C in the middle row, so here. And in the left hand, with a B Begriff System, I will have the notes going upwards from the lower part of the instrument towards the upper part of the instrument. And so on. Oh, and by the way, it's chromatically organized by half a tone going upwards from one button to another. On the second most widespread system, called the C-Griff system, so C-Griff system, it's completely upside down. So I would have the lower notes in the upper part of the instrument and the higher notes in the lower part of the instrument. And I will have the C in the outer row. And then there's another system, which is the Finnish system, and they have the C in the second row. So not in the middle, not in the outer, but in the second row. Same goes, for example, for button accordions, but they all have the lower notes here and the higher notes in the lower part of the instrument. So that's not an issue for the right hand. They just have the C in different rows. The Begriff, or the so-called Russian system, is the C button is in the middle. Normally the button accordion has 5 rows of buttons, 3 outer rows, and then 2 inner rows which are doubling the 2 outer rows. I know it sounds complicated, but you really don't have to think much about that. It's the job of the accordions to find the best way to perform your piece. But it's good that you know that these things are there, and the reason behind it is that the accordion is a very young instrument. It has been invented and patented in 1829 in Vienna. It was a very small box, maybe 20 times smaller as this instrument. It didn't have any buttons in the left-hand side and had only 6 buttons in the right-hand side. And there were 2 harmonies sounding all the time, one on the opening and one on the closing. One was the tonic and the other one was the dominant, so that you can perform very basic tunes on that instrument. The accordion is now 180, 190 years old, so we're still working on reaching a standard, but it's good that you know that there are these things there. Thank you for watching this video of the Composer's Toolkit. I hope you found it useful, I hope you liked it, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the other videos.